I'm getting ready to cut up this white ash for a shave horse I'm going to build, and I thought before I did that I'd spend a minute talking to you about reading the grain direction on the faces of plain sawn boards. I saw a video the other day on reading wood grain, and the person doing the video suggested that all you really need to do is look for the cathedrals on a board like this and just cut in that direction. And the problem with that is if you flip the board over, the cathedrals run in the same direction. And if you've ever used a hand plane on a board, you know that 99.9% of the time, if the grain is going this direction on this face, it's going the opposite direction on the other face, which means one of those arrows is pointing you in the wrong direction. So it's not as simple as just looking at the cathedrals. You also need to take a look at the end grain. So let's go there and do a little geography lesson. Okay, we're here at the end of this white ash, and I've taken a scraper and planed off the wax that they use to seal the end of the board. And that gives us a look at the growth rings for this tree. And you can see that they're basically concentric and they grow in an arc. So the radius of the arc gets bigger the further you get from the center of the tree, which makes sense because the tree adds rings as it ages. So the thing that's important to note from this is that the convex side, so the inside of the curve, is the heart of the tree. That's where the pith is, that's where the oldest part of the tree is. So we call that the heart. The convex side is the outside of the tree, that's the bark. So once you can look at the end of a board and tell which is the heart and which is the bark, you then have the first piece of information that you need to read the grain on the rest of the board. Okay, now that we know the difference between the heart side and the bark side, we can use that information along with the direction of the cathedrals to tell us which way to cut when we run a hand plane or a planer or a joiner over this board. And the thing that I tell my students is follow your heart, run from the bark. It's cheesy, I know, but if you remember it, it'll help you over and over and over again in your shop. So follow your heart means if you look at these cathedrals as if they are arrows, when you're on the heart side of the board, you go the direction they point you. If you are on the bark side of the board, you run away from the direction they're pointing you. So if this was the bark side of the board and the arrows were pointing this way, you run from that. You don't want to go the same direction as the cathedrals. So you can basically take that information, we are on the heart side of the board, we are on the concave side of the board, and we can walk down this board and we can look at what the cathedrals do, and that'll help us decide which way to plane based on where we are on the board. So here you see this eye in the middle, and the cathedrals run this way on this side and this way on the other. And that means that this tree was curved. And so if you're going to plane this face, you may have to start from here and plane this way, and then start from here and plane back that way. If your plane is really sharp, the mouth is really closed up tight, you may be able to get away with going all the way across. It all depends on just how extreme that change in grain is. And if we come down here, we've got a saddle. So you can see where the cathedrals are pointing towards each other, and this is basically where it breaks even. Right here, the grain is just about parallel with the surface of this board, so you don't get a growth ring coming through here. You can also use cathedrals to determine just how much runout you have on the grain, how steep the grain is. So if you look at the end grain of the board and the rings are relatively evenly spaced, when you look at growth rings, the farther apart they are, the softer the slower the grain is running out of the board, which means the closer it is to being parallel. But as they start to get closer together, the grain is running more quickly out of the board. So that's going to be a more extreme grain, which means the closer the rings are together, the more likely you are going to have to follow the direction that the heart tells you to go. And I learned this from an offhand comment made by Andy Wada at the North Bennett Street School in a video that he did with fine woodworking, and that got me thinking about grain direction and how to read it more easily. And he was talking about cherry, but I found this to be true for every Native American hardwood that doesn't have interlocked grain.